Hey, thanks, Matt, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the final presentation for today. We'll be talking about wildlife crossings and wildlife passage. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so I first kind of want to talk about the who, the what, and the why. Obviously, we're the Department of Transportation. Our mission is not to safely move wildlife across our roads, but it is to safely move people and goods. We have, as many of you know, the Vision Zero strategy, which is an initiative to see zero human fatalities on our roadway. So we're working towards that goal. But within our ETS division, we also have a purpose statement, and that is to foster stewardship for the human and natural environments that are affected by transportation projects. And so I want to talk a little bit about how roads affect wildlife. And so, with roads, we see, loss and fragmentation of habitat. Roads can act as barriers to dispersal. They can disrupt seasonal and interseasonal movements for some species. Some species just tend to avoid roadways completely. Pronghorns seem to not want to cross roads. They don't like to go over fences. But also, some species are attracted to the roadway, for instance, the bighorn sheep population in North Dakota. As if you've ever traveled Highway 85, you see them along the roadway quite frequently. They're habituated to the traffic. In some instances, they prefer the vegetation that grows near the roadway. So roadways kind of affect species just kind of based on their patterns and behaviors. But we also see direct injury and mortality to species, and for some species that might not be a big deal, but for some of our smaller big game populations, losing 2 or 3 or 10 individuals a year can drastically affect their population over the long term. Just want to touch a little bit about collisions in North Dakota with wildlife or animals. We have approximately 3,200 animal vehicle collisions annually. Of those, 34 result in injury, some sort of injury, and on average there's 1 death. And we're ranked 16th in the United States. And with all these collisions, there's millions of dollars associated with property damage to vehicles, insurance claims, and then there's also, if there's hospital bills or whatever, and then you can't put a price on life. And then there's also a value to the wildlife. North Dakota outdoor recreation is really important to the state's economy. Certainly a reason why I've decided to stay here and raise a family. I like to hunt, and I enjoy seeing our wildlife out there, and a lot of other people do too. So it's important for the people in North Dakota and the non-residents that come here to enjoy our outdoors. And so what can we do to kind of help reduce these collisions? We're never going to completely eliminate animal vehicle collisions, but we can install dedicated wildlife crossings where it's appropriate, and then also accommodate wildlife passage, and that can be passage benches underneath a bridge structure or oversizing a culvert, things like that. And then just adapting and learning to see what our other states are doing, and other countries as well, see how they're mitigating impacts of transportation to wildlife. And so why we do this is, short answer, I guess, would be it's the right thing to do. We don't want to do this just because the Game and Fish asked us to, or that we need to get a permit from the Corps of Engineers, so we have to agree to certain terms. We really want to increase safety for our motorists, maintain habitat connectivity, and decrease wildlife mortality. And like I said, that's important to the people of North Dakota. So I just want to kind of discuss the differences conceptually, what a wildlife crossing is versus what I talk about wildlife passage or accommodation. So like a dedicated wildlife crossing, it's really targeting a certain species or several species. A lot of work goes into the design and location of these type of features. And when we're talking about wildlife crossing, it's typically an overpass or underpass type structure. And with this, there's what we call exclusionary fencing to help funnel wildlife to these crossings and also keep them off the roadway. And within the fencing, you either call them escape ramps or jump outs, where if an animal does get on the roadway side, within the fencing, they have ways to get out. And then obviously gates and stuff, and wildlife guards on the roads that kind of tie into the highway or interstates. And it takes a great deal of collaboration and partnerships with state game and fish departments, and depends on where the project is, like Forest Service, for example, or Park Service, and just a lot of planning goes into these And you don't just build them and walk away. There's monitoring associated with these crossings and maintenance to ensure the long-term functionality of the crossing, because they are a very large investment for DOTs to install these structures. And so we want to make sure they're designed appropriately and they work the way they're supposed to. And so when we're talking about wildlife passage or accommodation, there's not necessarily target species. It's a really flexible design, especially when we're talking about a passage bench underneath the bridge. As you can see, there's a picture there, just a simple 3-foot wide path underneath the bridge will move a lot of different species of wildlife, because waterways function as natural travel corridors, so we'd rather see wildlife go under a bridge than over the roadway near the bridge. And there's other things like oversized culverts, or adding an additional cell can be elevated to make sure it stays dry throughout the year. And then some of these larger bridge spans also function for wildlife crossings. They weren't necessarily designed for that aspect, but they do function as a wildlife crossing as well. And we're talking about these passage or accommodations. There's no fencing or jump outs associated with these type of features. There's very low maintenance, and especially in talking about these passage benches, very little cost it goes into these. Obviously, when you're talking about oversizing a culvert or something, there's costs associated with that. But for passage benches, it's really cheap to install, and they work really well. So here's just some examples of what overpass type structures. We don't have any in North Dakota, but when you're looking at installing these, you really don't want to over design or under design them, because they are very expensive. So you really kind of have to find that sweet spot of how wide and how long they're going to be. And obviously, you don't want to spend too much money, but you don't want to invest a couple $1 million and find out it doesn't work either. So just a few examples. These are underpass type structures, and with these, we have 2 of these installed now in North Dakota, and especially for the ungulate species, deer and elk and bighorn sheep, the openness is really an important factor. So when an animal walks up to it, it's imperative that they're able to see through it well and want to be able to cross it. At the top left, there's a grizzly bear. They don't really care. It's a dark tunnel. They're a predator. They don't mind going through those type of structures, and that kind of applies to other predators as well. And like I said earlier, there's exclusionary fencing associated with these structures. Typically, it's an 8-foot wire mesh fence that goes for some distance on each side of the structure, and it's always kind of a $1 million question on where to stop and where to end these things, and it just kind of depends on the project and the location and the species on where to stop and start the fencing. And then also jump outs associated within the fencing. So like I say, if an animal does get trapped on the highway side, they have opportunities to get out safely. And then these bridge spans, these are 3 bridges in North Dakota that function well as wildlife crossings. They weren't necessarily designed for that aspect, but the top left is the newly constructed Long X Bridge. You see nice long spans on each end there where wildlife can move underneath. On the top right is the Drayton Bridge that connects Minnesota and North Dakota over the Red River, also an excellent wildlife crossing. And the bottom left is the Jamestown Bypass, also functions well as a wildlife crossing. And these don't have any fencing or anything associated with them. So our first wildlife crossing we ever constructed was part of the environmental assessment for the Lewis and Clark Bridge replacement and the 4-laning as part of a series of projects from Watford City to Williston. As you get closer to Williston on the river bottoms, it's the Lewis and Clark Wildlife Management Area. It's one of the largest WMAs in the state. It is owned by the Corps of Engineers, managed by the Game and Fish Department. It's excellent wildlife habitat. There's been a history of wildlife vehicle collisions, high traffic levels through this area. And so, going from a 2-lane to a 4-lane, we wanted to maintain habitat connectivity in this area, and for particularly for moose and white-tailed deer and other species. But unfortunately, it's also a floodplain, right? So it floods frequently, some years worse than others. So the crossing is designed specifically for moose. It's a 15-foot tall by 40-foot wide single-span pre-stressed box beam bridge. It's approximately 86-foot wide across the roadway. And as you can see, that top left, it really has a good openness feel to it. You look through it, you can see daylight on the other side. So I think that it was designed appropriately. And then we also designed a high flow structure, which was mainly meant to move water during high flow periods, but also was meant to function as a wildlife crossing during drier periods. And this is just a triple box culvert, 10 by 10. Each cell is 10 foot by 10 foot. And it's a little bit longer. It's 136 foot long. So right away, we had these constructed in 2017. We had early signs of use. There's raccoons, coyotes, deer, turkey, moose. The moose right away, they weren't too keen on it. They would walk up to it and turn around. So we didn't get any actual moose crossings, like going through the structure, but they would walk up to it. I think one even made it halfway through and turned around and came out. So this was our first wildlife crossing. It was exciting, but that kind of ended abruptly, and the dream soon became a nightmare. So we had 2 years of pretty heavy flood events in the river bottom area near Williston. This is exactly what you don't want to see at a wildlife crossing, but I can't really predict what nature is going to do. And so we had 2 years of pretty high flow going through the structure, which caused quite a bit of scouring on the outlet side. And so here's the video. Hopefully it plays okay. Just kind of showing what was happening as the water kind of comes through the structure. North Dakota is not known for whitewater rafting, but this is probably as close as we can get. Probably would have been pretty fun to ride a raft through this. So as you can imagine, as this kind of occurs, long period of time, it created a very large scour hole. Here's a picture, and this is, I believe, after the first year of a major flood event. It's pretty big. You can see part of the sheet piling as part of the structure integrity sticking out there a little bit. The second picture obviously got a lot bigger the second year, so we actually had to do a temporary repair just to help protect that sheet piling. So we dumped some riprap on just to kind of ensure that was going to stay in place. And rumor has it, this became a popular fishing destination. So I had to sneak up there one day, and lo and behold, I found Bill Gathman from our Williston district fishing on his lunch break. And he told me not to tell anybody about the fishing spot, but now it's gone. So I guess the secret is out. This is the scouring that occurred through the high flow structure. Again, not good. It created quite a big scour hole, pretty deep. So we repaired that as well. That's just some Google Earth imagery showing this is the wildlife crossing here. You can see the outline of the scour. This is the high flow structure, another large scour. So we had to kind of go back to the drawing board. We wanted to obviously fix the scour hole, but we also wanted to do a little bit of a longer term fix to ensure functionality of the wildlife crossing and also protect the integrity of the structure and the roadway. So we brought in our resident wildlife crossing expert, Daryl, the designer. We asked him, Daryl, can we fix this? And he, without hesitation, he said, yes, we can. So we ended up placing a lot of riprap within the scour hole, kind of patching that back up with earth, and that happened on both the wildlife crossing and the high flow structure. And then also installing a ditch block or a berm on the inlet side of the wildlife crossing. And this was meant to help as we get these high water events, that it's not going to hopefully not overtop the berm and keep water from going through the structure and creating that scouring. So as we were working on this project and lowering the water to start the repairs, it was actually full of fish. Game and fish, you can hear some game and fish staff kind of netting them out there so they can get them back in the river. Some of the species were in there: northern pike, carp, white bass, bullheads, crappies. Picture showing them, getting them out of there. And here is the ditch block. It was designed at a height that we didn't want it to be too high, so that wildlife, didn't want to use the crossing, and we also wanted to have it high enough to prevent those high water events from going through the structure. And since I picked on Bill and Daryl a little bit, Bullwinkle and I approve this project. We think it's going to work and help the crossing be functional, which we want it to be. So, and now our Minot district came down with a drone and took some footage of the repair work, and so I'll play that for you guys. You see the ditch block there, the wildlife crossing. Tower holes nice and patched up. Kind of shows it's really excellent. Just for the sake of time, I'll end the video, but that shows the repair work pretty good. We hope it's going to work and get our crossing functional again. Oops. Okay, so we did the repair work, and Game and Fish got their cameras back up, and we already have some success. Moose have actually used both the high flow and the wildlife crossing, so that's exciting to see. And it's really kind of a one of a kind situation. I don't think there's another wildlife crossing in the world that has to deal with flooding issues like this one. Next, I'll talk about our other crossing that has recently been constructed. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because we talked about this quite a bit last week, but this one was designed specific for bighorn sheep. It was part of the Highway 85 project from Bellfield to Watford City. It's a precast.
Hey, Greg, can you share your content again?
Yep. Okay, come back up.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yep. So this is the Bellfield to Watford City project. We installed a underpass type structure specifically for bighorn sheep. Fencing we haven't installed yet. It's going to be installed later this year. A second underpass structure is going to be installed at a future date, approximately 2 miles south of the existing structure. And essentially the whole Badlands stretch will have the exclusionary fencing. Long X Bridge will function as a wildlife crossing, and then the bighorn sheep underpass, and then further to the south there'll be another underpass, and that's more geared towards mule deer and other species. The bighorn don't quite go down that far, but so it'll be a series of 3 wildlife crossings. Just a few pictures. I've seen quite a few last week. We've had Game and Fish has a temporary camera up right now. As we get the fencing installed, they'll be putting some better equipment up. But we've already had mule deer use the structure, so that's exciting, especially since there's no fencing or anything installed yet. So now I want to jump in and talk about accommodating wildlife and wildlife passage bench design, and we're talking about installing a path underneath a bridge structure, and the purpose of this is to increase roadway safety by trying to keep animals underneath the roadway than having them go over. It provides a safe footing for bridge inspection and maintenance activities. And it's virtually very cheap to install and doesn't take a whole lot of design effort to get that in there. It's just essentially just a flat spot, a minimum of 3 feet is recommended. Obviously it can be wider, and just kind of depends on the structure and the river channel or creek channel on where that bench is going to be placed, and also the piers and of the bridge. So just a few examples, and then this bench is built, and then you want to put some sort of either aggregate or a topsoil to kind of make that path walkable. Class 5 is aggregate is recommended, but it can be that bottom middle picture is quite a bit bigger, but it functions well still. And that bottom right is what we don't want to see. That's basically a barrier for wildlife movement. And although riprap is great for protecting a structure, if we can get a path in there, try to keep animals off the roadway, and that's what we're looking for. We've done this on a few bridges. The first one we've done was on just south of Pembina on Interstate 29. This is just kind of a panoramic view showing the path on each side of the river here. I believe this was installed 2017. So almost immediately we had this path constructed. We had wildlife using it, turkeys, deer, geese, moose, skunk, raccoon, rabbit, and we even caught footage of the great American mulchman, very, very rare species, but we got them. And the old saying from the Kevin Costner movie, if you build it, they will come, holds true. This is one that we recently did just south of Mayville. This was just constructed this last fall. We don't have any cameras up or anything on this one yet, but the contractor did say they saw some deer tracks on it soon after it was constructed. So these passage benches work really well. Other states do them, and we find success on them pretty regularly. Just a few more pictures. Just want to thank Houston Engineering for taking some photos and sending them to me. Shows the path kind of extending, and you want the path to extend all the way across the riprap. So this one was constructed pretty well. And just other options, obviously the wildlife bench like I've been talking about, but Minnesota DOT has been kind of going back through some areas where they don't have a bench installed, and they've been just surfacing the riprap with aggregate, and it works really well for wildlife passage. Other options we can look at, obviously there's a reason why we install box culverts sometimes. They're a lot cheaper. There's less maintenance associated with them, but they're not always the best for aquatic and wildlife passage. And so other things we can look at is adding additional cells, like the bottom left. During lower flow or low water times throughout the year, they can be used for wildlife passage, and then just oversizing a culvert can work as well. So just I want to wrap up the conclusion. Our overall goal is to do the right thing, and that is to increase safety for motorists, improve and maintain habitat connectivity, and reduce mortality to wildlife. As I mentioned, we're never going to completely eliminate the animal vehicle collisions, but we can implement dedicated wildlife crossings where it's appropriate, and maintain and monitor them, and make changes as necessary. And work towards installing passage benches more frequently and becoming a standard practice where it makes sense. Explore other options for box culverts. And what does the future hold? I don't know. As technology increases, and especially in vehicles, maybe they're going to be able to detect wildlife moving from a distance and stop your vehicle in time. So maybe Elon Musk can work on that for us. And that is all I have for you today. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you, Greg. Great job. Great presentation. Yeah, we have a couple of questions that have come in. One, I think you touched on, but have any moose made it through the crossing yet?
Yes, as I saw the pictures there, we're getting on both structures actually. Moose are going through. I haven't seen any recently, but Game and Fish is kind of keeping track of the monitoring for us and sending pictures as they come in.
That was going to kind of be my follow-up too, is what is the plan for monitoring the effectiveness of those dedicated crossings?
So that's kind of all part of working with the Game and Fish Department is the maintenance, part of the maintenance too, but monitoring. So we develop MOUs with them, and they are going to monitor the structures for us and kind of provide a report on the effectiveness, and so they're kind of handling that and work with them as kind of issues arise and if we need to make any changes.
Sure. Another question that came in is, how do you protect the wildlife crossing from being washed away during high flow events? And I got a feeling this is maybe referring to the bench, the passages and the benches that you were going through towards the end.
Yep. So I mean, it's not perfect, right? There's going to be some, as you got high water events, it's probably going to wash some of that away, but also over time, it's going to fill back in with natural sediment as sediment kind of transports through the bridge structure. So there may be some maintenance if we got to get some dirt put back in, but ideally, over time, it's going to fill back in on its own.
Sure.
And I think using some of that larger aggregate too would help rather than just dirt. Oh
yeah, you bet. You talked about how those wildlife accommodations can be incorporated into projects, and is that how we are looking at projects now as we're developing projects into the future?
Yeah, I mean, it really just kind of depends on the project. When we're looking at these dedicated wildlife crossings, they're obviously very expensive. We can't put these things everywhere, so it really kind of depends. Like when you get into Western North Dakota, that's where we have a lot of the big game species. So it just really kind of depends on the project, the local wildlife. But certainly the passage bench concept is something we're going to look at on more projects moving forward.
You got some commentary that there's some appreciation for your gopher, your ground squirrel picture there.
Oh yeah, I believe Poppy Mills took this picture, so I thought it was pretty fitting for a little critter like that for them to see what it looks like to cross a roadway.
Yep, very much so. Got a couple more. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Greg.